Hey, what's going on, y'all? My name is Cecil, and welcome to another episode of Slinging Baits, the Catfish Lab series, brought to you by Slinging Baits and the official Catfish Conference. Well, without further ado, let's jump right into it. For today's discussion, we're going to be talking about catfish rigs. I'm going to be showing y'all 5 different catfishing rigs that'll help you catch more catfish and become a better catfisherman or woman. Whether you fishing from a boat or the bank, any of these rigs that I show y'all today will definitely help you catch more catfish. So now that we got all that covered, let's head back to the Catfish Lab and have some fun. Yes, sir. Alright, y'all. So before we get started, let's make sure everybody understands what an actual catfish rig is. Basically, a catfish rig is a combination of fishing tackle added to a piece of fishing line, also referred to as leader line. Catfish rigs are used to present your baits whenever fishing for catfish. What is leader line? Basically, leader line is a separate piece of fishing line used to tie your catfish rig. On one end of the leader line, you will attach a hook. Then on the other end of the leader line, you will attach a barrel swivel, some type of connector. It's this separate length of fishing line in which your catfish rigs are tied. Whenever catfishing, in most cases, your leader line should always be heavier than your main line. Unless, for instance, you're using a heavier main line, then it's okay to use a lighter leader line. But I would advise to only do this at your own risk, because catfish mouths are like gritty sandpaper, and using a lighter leader line could cause the leader line to snap and break off. Here are some examples of leader lines I like to use when I'm fishing for catfish. Alright, let's take a second to talk about leader line lengths now. Basically, a long leader line allows your bait plenty of room to move around and drift with the current. A shorter leader line is what I like to call keeping them on a short leash. Basically, keeping your bait stationary in one spot, not really allowing your bait to move around a lot. You can try experimenting with different leader line lengths until you get your desired results. Whenever I'm catfishing, I like to use shorter leader lines because they get snagged less often and cast further than longer leader lines. Another important thing to remember is, if you use a swivel or any type of connector, always remember to add a bead on the end of your main line to protect your knot from any damage from your sinker weight sliding up and down on your main line. Please note, now that we got all the basics out the way, the first rig we're going to be discussing today is the classic Carolina rig. This is one of the most popular and well-known catfish rigs. If you used any catfish rig before, then you probably used and seen this rig before. This catfish rig really helps with presenting your baits in the most natural manner. So if you should know any catfish rig, you should get familiar with this one. The Carolina rig is a very effective bottom rig for any catfishing situation. The traditional Carolina rig uses an egg sinker, but my only issue with these style sinkers are they always tend to roll along the bottom and get snagged. So instead, I like to use my Carolina rig with a sinker slide. Basically, the ideal of this rig is to keep your baits near the bottom in one spot. Your main line will slide freely through the sinker slide, allowing the catfish to take your bait and swim off with little to no resistance from the sinker weight. If you take a look at the illustration on screen, The Carolina rig consists of Now let's take a look at a few underwater examples of this rig and a few different ways you can set it up. Some of the things I like about the Carolina rig are, it's a simple catfish rig and it's easy to construct. It also casts further than most catfish rigs, which makes it a great bank fishing rig. I also like how the Carolina rig has a natural presentation. In my opinion, nothing beats natural when it comes to catfish. I like to use natural baits also. I also like to use the sinker slide method. I can easily switch my sinker weights quickly without having to retie any knots. Overall, this is a very versatile catfish rig. Just by adding the peg float above the hook, you can easily turn this Carolina rig into a Santee Cooper rig, which brings us to our next catfish rig we're going to be discussing today, the Santee Cooper rig. The Santee Cooper rig is one of my favorite catfish rigs to use whenever I'm bank fishing. Ever since I learned how to use this catfish rig, I definitely started catching more catfish. If you watch my channel, then you'll see me using this rig a lot. This catfish rig is great when you want to suspend your baits up off the bottom. This rig will float your bait at the appropriate height in what we catfishermen and women like to call the strike zone. I mainly use this rig with cut bait, but it also works well with live bait depending on the situation. Basically, the ideal behind the Santee Cooper rig is to float your bait up off the bottom just enough to attract the curious catfish. If you take a look at the illustrations on the screen, the Santee Cooper rig consists of Now let's take a look at a few underwater examples of this rig and a few different ways you can set it up. Some of the things I like about the Santee Cooper rig are, in most places I fish, they have a ton of turtles and they love to steal my bait. This rig really helps me with keeping the turtles in check. This rig may not stop the turtles from stealing your bait, but it certainly will make it more difficult. The Santee Cooper rig works well in instances where there's a lot of snags where you're fishing, like rocky bottoms. My only issue with this rig is it's difficult to cast far when bank fishing. Other than that, the Santee Cooper rig is almost always on at least one of my rods. Overall, this is another versatile catfish rig. Just by using a longer or shorter leader line, you can float your bait at different depths. You can also experiment with this rig by using different size floats and baits for those bigger catfish. Alright y'all, the next catfish rig we're going to be discussing is the high-low rig, also referred to as the Kentucky rig, the double hook rig, or the fish finder rig. But in this video, we just going to call it the high-low rig. The high-low rig works excellent in cold water situations. I love to use this rig during the winter months. With the high-low rig, you can use 2 smaller baits that equal 1 large bait. The central of 1 big bait is just equivalent to 2 smaller baits, if you catch my drift. If you take a look at the illustration on screen, the high-low rig consists of Now let's take a look at a few underwater examples of this rig and a few different ways you can set it up. Some of the things that I don't like about the high-low rig are, it tangles a lot more than other catfish rig. Some of the things that I do like about the high-low rig are, it has less tackle and it's a simple but effective catfish rig. With this rig, you can easily change your weight and hook sizes quickly. Overall, this is a very effective catfish rig to know and pull out when the situation calls. The high-low rig is definitely a catfish rig you should try the next time the weather gets cold. And don't forget, this rig is ideal for cold water situations, at least in my experiences. Alright y'all, the next catfishing rig we're going to be discussing is the 3-way rig. The 3-way rig is very versatile and great when used with live or cut bait presentations. This rig is good for when you're fishing heavy cover like log jams, or you're fishing snaggy places with rocky bottoms, or even open water situations. Basically, the ideal design behind this rig is to keep your bait suspended off the bottom while also keeping your bait stationary in one spot. If you take a look at the illustration on the screen, the 3-way rig consists of Now let's take a look at a few underwater examples of this rig and a few different ways you can set it up. My only issue with the 3-way rig is it gets snagged a lot more often than other catfish rigs. The dangling sinker weight can get snagged and cause you to lose a fish. Another option I like to prevent this is to use a lighter piece of leader line attached to your sinker weight. That way, if your sinker weight gets snagged on something, you will only lose your sinker and not your catch. Some of the things I do like about this rig are, you can cast it very far, which makes it a great rig for bank fishing. You can also use this rig in almost any catfish situation. Overall, the 3-way rig is another versatile catfish rig. You can literally make any adjustments with it and catch catfish. The 3-way rig is so versatile, you should at least consider giving it a try on your next catfishing trip. This rig is very effective for presenting live or cut baits in heavy current or still waters. Alright y'all, the last catfish rig we're going to be discussing today is the slip float rig. This is a great live bait rig. I like to use this rig because you can cover a lot of water fast by just letting your bait drift around. With this rig, you can also present your bait in front of a more wide range of catfish. This is absolutely one of my favorite catfish rigs to use with live or cut baits. Basically, the ideal design behind this rig is to float your bait off the bottom at different depths. If you take a look at the illustration on the screen, the slip float rig consists of Now let's take a look at a few underwater examples of this rig and a few different ways you can set it up. One thing I don't like about the slip float rig is, whenever I'm fishing with live bait, the bait fish tends to swim around and eventually get snagged on something from the dangling sinker weight. Another option I like to prevent this is to use a weighted slip float. That way you don't have the sinker weight dangling around with the bait fish. Some of the things I do like about the slip float rig are, you can easily adjust the depth of your bait by sliding the bobber stop up or down. For me, this is very convenient because I can cover a lot of water in a short period of time. Overall, this is another highly effective and versatile catfish rig that is sometimes overlooked but can certainly be effective in the right occasion. I like to use the cigar shaped floats, the weighted floats. They work better for me in my opinion. This rig is a good choice for drifting baits across shallow flats in lakes, ponds, creeks, or reservoirs. I like to use fresh cut baits and let the wind or the current push my bait across the lake out towards deeper water. Now let's take a look at some ways you can modify your catfish rigs to make them better at attracting more catfish. Another important thing to think about is, whenever choosing the right catfish rig, you should always consider sight, scent, and sound. Can the catfish see your bait? Can they smell it? Or can they hear your bait? All of these senses help catfish find their food. So whenever I'm picking a catfish rig to use or choosing the right bait, I almost always think about sight, scent, and sound. Over the years, several basic catfish rigs like the Carolina rig and the 3-way rig have all been modified and tweaked to some degree for better results. So if you're like me and you like to be a little more tactical, try modifying your catfish rigs to improve their performance. Now ask yourself, how could you make your catfish rigs better? Once you have the basics down, try modifying one of these rigs I showed today in this video and experiment with different scenarios next time you're out on the water. There will come a day when you need to use one of these catfish rigs, so study them all closely and get familiar with the rigs. If you really want to have some fun, try combining some of these catfish rigs together, like the 3-way with the Santee Cooper rig. Hey, what's going on, y'all? Welcome back. Well, I hope y'all had fun today, and I hope this video is helpful for those of you out there that's just now new to catfishing, or you could be like me and you're still learning about catfishing. But either way, some of these rigs you may have seen or used before, and some of you may not have seen or used before. But I challenge you, on your next catfishing trip, try one of these rigs that you haven't before, and maybe it'll help you catch more catfish. Unfortunately, this is the end of the show, but I would like to say thank y'all out there for watching. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you want to see more content like this. Until the next one, y'all. Peace.